Good morning again. A very warm welcome to all of you. It is my absolute pleasure and honor on behalf of the IMF, the World Bank, and the IDB to welcome you all to this conference on building resilience to disaster and climate change in the Caribbean. We have a packed agenda today, and we have a lot of interesting topics to cover, so let's get started. To open today's conference, we have leaders of the three institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, and the IDB, who will be making opening remarks. And we also have Minister Bibeau from Canada, who will also be providing opening remarks. Without further ado, I invite Managing Director Christine Lagarde of the International Monetary Fund to make her opening remarks. But before that, I draw your attention to the screen for a 1-minute video that we have made for the conference. Thank you.
When it comes to climate change, we're running out of time.
Everyone here knows that we must act fast. The projected cost of doing nothing about these issues are simply staggering.
Climate change is expected to certainly intensify the impact of natural disasters and worsen the vulnerabilities of small states in the Caribbean. We must come together. Well, good morning to all of you. Good morning, presidents, prime ministers, heads of governments, ministers of finance, central bank governors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my real pleasure to welcome you on this important conference on building resilience to natural disasters and climate change in the Caribbean. It was only a few weeks ago where I met many of you in Bali, where just before the annual meetings, a massive earthquake and tsunami struck the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, killing 2,000 people, injuring many more, and destroying over 70,000 homes. Closer to home, Hurricanes Irma and Maria devastated parts of the Caribbean last year, causing much destruction and suffering. And more recently, Hurricane Michael wreaked havoc in Florida. So these are repeated reminders that natural disasters know of no boundaries and carry no passport. No country is immune, no region is safe. And in so many instances, the finger points to climate change, surely the greatest existential threat of our time. Just recently, not to mention the report that was released a couple of days by the US administrations, but just recently, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change told us that the threat to our planet and its people is even more grave than we thought. As you all know so well, it is already making these disasters more ferocious, more frequent, and more frightening. It is therefore crucial that countries live up to their Paris Agreement commitments and move toward a fully decarbonized global economy over the next few decades. We must push forward with great ambition and resist any temptation towards backsliding. It is actually fitting that the next CAP conference is actually taking place in very short order. Now, equally important is adaptation and is strengthening resilience, which is why we're here together today. Thank you for being here with us. It has, of course, special resonance in the Caribbean region, which is on the front line of climate change. Its islands are amongst the top 25 most vulnerable nations. and their small size implies a big cost. Disaster damage in the Caribbean is 6 times more than in larger states. Think about this. In the United States, where it was much talked about, Hurricane Katrina generated losses of about 160 billion back in 2005. 160 billions. How much was that? 1% of US GDP. Compare that against Dominica, present here today, thank you, Prime Minister, in 2017, where damages after Hurricane Maria exceeded not 1%, 200% of GDP. It follows that building resilience to natural disasters and climate change in this region is a necessity, not a luxury. As we see it, building resilience to disasters and climate change rests on 3 complementary pillars. The first is securing structural protection through resilient infrastructure, adequate land use, zoning rules and building codes, and early warning systems. The second is financial protection through insurance and other risk-sharing and blended finance mechanisms in order to reduce the cost of damage done by disasters when they occur. And the final pillar is emergency response by ensuring rapid access to financing and the contingency plans that have been tested beforehand in order to help with recovery after the disaster has struck. Now, the Caribbean countries have for sure made a lot of progress, including by strengthening regional cooperation for rapid disaster response and creating the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility. But more needs to be done, especially with regard to improving the resilience of public infrastructure and key economic sectors to natural disasters and climate change. This kind of investment can deliver big gains for countries. We have conducted some recent research on EQ countries, and that research estimates that investing in public capital resilient to natural disasters can actually increase GDP potential by 3 to 11%. But this sounds like a good number, right? 3 to 11%. But despite that really attractive number, there are numerous reasons why these kinds of investments are lagging in the region. And we need to explore them, we need to face them. On the domestic front, as many of you know, there is the issue of debt and debt to GDP ratio, which leaves generally very little fiscal space to many of you. On the international front, the lion's share of funding is for disaster assistance, not necessarily financing for adaptation. So more ex post than ex ante. At the same time, cumbersome administrative procedures combined with capacity constraints complicate access to financing from climate funds. And there is one final obstacle, which is actually of a political nature, because those investments require political capital to be invested up front, with rewards to be actually reaped down the road when the political actors who've made the investment might no longer be around. And that's a difficult trade-off for anybody who is in politics. So against this backdrop, let me just now turn to what we think is needed to move forward. And we believe in particular, as was indicated in the film, that we have to come together. It has to be a collective effort in response in order to move the needle from an overarching focus on recovery following natural disaster toward building longer-term resilience ahead of the natural disasters. And in turn, this will require a new approach based on an alliance of all stakeholders, from domestic to international, from public to private, in order to mobilize the resources that are based on credible strategies. Let me now very quickly address where and how we see that strategy likely to be actually successful. It will take the leadership of the countries first and foremost. And they have to demonstrate that they can keep their fiscal house in order and develop an umbrella disaster resilience strategy with input and support from the international financial institutions. And I'm delighted that today many of them are in the room, from the World Bank, represented by Kristalina, to the Inter-American Development Bank, represented by Luis Alberto. Thank you for sharing this conference and participating as you do. This strategy would lay out a well-designed and fully costed resilience building plan, including for risk transfer, which would be embedded in a sustainable, multi-year macro fiscal framework. It will require some new thinking about that framework. Such a strategy that would integrate both micro and macro reforms would in turn need, and that's the second main actors who have to be involved, the support of the international community at large, public sector, private sector, and humanitarian and NGOs as well. Climate change, after all, is a global problem that requires global action. My hope is that this kind of strategy will generate the credibility needed to entice low costs and grant financing from development partners, climate funds, and international financial institutions. But it has to take those two steps, one after the other, in order to actually reach that credibility level that will bring this particular concessional funding together in order to form enough of a blended finance that it helps in sufficient quantities. To operationalize this idea, we propose using 2 pilot countries for which supporting work is already underway, including a climate change policy assessment that we conduct jointly with the World Bank, CCPA, you may have heard of those assessments. During the course of today's discussion, I hope that you will deliberate on this approach, and I hope that we can together formulate a way forward. Before I close, let me now turn quickly to the role of the IMF in this, and let me assure you that we will continue to be reliable partners and trying to serve you as close as possible to the terrain and to the special characteristics of each and every individual island. We have several initiatives underway. First, we're helping build capacity and strengthen public financial management to better manage fiscal resources and address disaster risks. We have a technical center which is called CARTAC, many of you know it. It has played a pivotal role in that effort, and I want here to thank particularly Marie-Claude, the Minister of Development for Canada, who's been so supportive of CARTAC. Thank you ever so much. I think on behalf of the room, I would like to express my gratitude to you and through you to your Canadian authorities for helping support this initiative. Thank you. We have launched, second initiative, together with the World Bank, the Climate Change Policy Assessment that I just mentioned, the CCPA, to assess country preparedness and identify needed reforms. I think we have under our belt in the Caribbean 2 islands that are either completed or soon to be completed, and we are prepared to do more. Third, we're working with the bank, the World Bank, on the technical design of state contingent debt instruments, which could help ease short-term financing burdens on countries hit by natural disasters. And actually, a note that I think you have in your material, summarizing staff's analysis is there to be reviewed by yourself. I'm also pleased that draft term sheets from the International Capital Markets Association for various instrument structures are now available for interested sovereigns and investors. This is a most recent development. Please, check those new terms that have been prepared and approved. Fourth, we have increased the annual access limits under our rapid credit facilities for countries that are hit by disasters. So I'm moving away from the ex ante that I'm here trying to advocate to the ex post. So we really are looking forward to your views, to hearing from you in the course of the day. And I'm just delighted that so many of you have accepted the invitation to this challenge that we sort of gave to ourselves a year ago in Jamaica when we decided that we had to focus together on this issue of resilience. With that, I thank you very much, wish you a great conference, and I think I'm happy to give the floor to Kristalina if I follow the right order of things. Kristalina, floor is yours.
Good morning, Presidents, Prime Ministers, dear Christine, Luis Alberto, friends in this room. I am extremely impressed by the advancements that the IMF, under the leadership of Christine Lagarde, has made on recognizing climate change as the most significant threat to development and building the policy capacity to deal with it. Let me start with a personal story. Like many of you, recently I read the IPCC latest report, a very tough read. It basically tells us that we are very close to missing our chance to stay within 1.5 degree increase of average temperatures. It tells us that the implications of going beyond 1.5 degree are much more dramatic than we initially thought. And it tells us that the costs are going to be higher than we initially anticipated. I finished reading the report and I could not sleep this night. I thought of my 8-year granddaughter and I thought of the future we are going to have for her. And you in the Caribbean are already seeing what this future is likely to be. Just a week later, I got an invitation to co-chair the Global Commission on Adaptation together with Ban Ki-moon and Bill Gates. And of course, I accepted with great thanks and gratitude, because in my many, many decades of civil service that I have been so privileged to have, this working on adaptation is likely to be the most significant and the most consequential for the person I love the most, my granddaughter. So when I address you today, I do it on behalf of the bank, but also from my heart. We have no time to waste. We are the last generation that can do something to change the course of climate change, and we are the first generation to live with its consequences. And that requires from us to recognize that while we have to continue to strive to mitigate, the train has left this station. We have to mitigate and adapt at the same time. And that the course of adaptation is one that we are not quite yet moving fast enough on. And this conference today gives us an opportunity as institutions to make that recognition and together with you to accelerate change. What does it mean for us at the World Bank? Let me first start by giving credit to my colleagues at the bank who have already been working hard on addressing climate change. We are the first development institution to actually reach parity between the investments we make on mitigation and those we make on adaptation this last year. We have promised to have 28% of our lending going for climate action. We have already exceeded this target. It was by 2020. Today we are already at 33%, 2 years before deadline, and we are doing significantly more on what matters tremendously to all of you in this room: building resilience, adapting to the shocks that climate change brings upon us. In the Caribbean, we have invested about $2 billion for resilience building, of which $1 billion from either our concessional arm. And we, with the support of our members, have tripled funding for either eligible Caribbean countries, for small states, and we are designating the bulk of this funding to build resilience in the region. We recognize that what Christine said is so very true. Acting early in a mode of prevention saves lives and reduces losses. We know that $1 invested in prevention can bring $4 to $7 in damage cost avoided. And therefore, it is a very good investment to make. What we propose to this conference today are 3 areas of focus. First, robust fiscal responsibility framework and financial innovation. We very much support a message from Christine on building, in financial terms, counter-cyclical fiscal policies that also include building buffers for the case when inevitably disaster would strike. We are very keen to see more use of innovative financial instruments. We have been on the front line of contingent financing. We have a number of you already adopting the contingent finance instrument we call CAT-DDO, Catastrophe Deferred Drawdown Facility. We actually put it in Dominica in place, so if we have another risk, we are ready to go. We have been supporting the Caribbean to create the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, and it is paying off. When a disaster strikes, the money is immediately there. But we believe that we have to do much more. We would like to see the use of contingent finance also to buffer countries against debt service when a disaster comes. It is really heartbreaking to have you in the face of disaster and you still have to pay interest rates to the loans to the World Bank. And what we are working on is how we can buffer you against, create a credit service space or holiday for you while you're dealing with the immediate shock of the disaster. And these debt service insurance instruments, I believe, are a must in today's environment. And we had at breakfast a conversation around the role of insurance. For you, the tourism sector is critical, but insurance premium for hotels have skyrocketed. How can we deal with this problem together? Our second area of focus is investing in preparedness, physical and natural capital. What we would like to be sure is that infrastructure finance is up to par, not with the risks of today, but the risks of tomorrow, those that are to come. We are now working with St. Martin. This is a very exciting partnership. And there, a new hospital will be able to withstand Category 5 hurricane speed width. We have to do that everywhere in public infrastructure and, of course, care about the private housing. We would like to see early warning systems being harmonized across the region and being 21st century early warning systems with the technology that is coming, not even the one that we already have. And we want to make nature work as protector of people. And that is to say, to build the barrier reefs so they the mangroves and the reefs can be a shock absorber. So that focus on preparedness in physical and natural capital is absolutely paramount. Last but not least, adaptive safety nets and social protection programs to protect the most vulnerable when a disaster hits. For example, in Dominica and St. Martin, we are working with the governments to improve the efficiency of the country's social protection system and to identify the most vulnerable populations at highest risk, so they can be first online to be helped when the need is there. What we are seeing is that this notion of social safety nets, it has to be also gender sensitive. With Canada being at the table, women are, for a variety of reasons, often end up being more vulnerable. and therefore protection has to be gender sensitive. But women also are a strong force of resilience, and therefore they have to be built in this mindset change that we need so much. Let me finish with something that you have heard me talking about, and I will repeat it. I will repeat it until it gets done. And it is to rethink classification of countries. Finance for middle and high-income countries that are most vulnerable to shocks ought to reflect the new realities of climate change. We ought to think about concessionality, following the people in need in this new world of climate change we live in. And I very much count on your voices to be strong and loud so we can do more in concessional terms for those that are at highest risk. And with this, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Georgieva, the Chief Executive Officer of the World Bank. Thank you for a very inspiring speech. I now invite Mr. Moreno, President of the Inter-American Development Bank, for his remarks.
Good morning, everybody. Presidents, prime ministers, ministers. Of course, thank you very much, Kristalina and Christine, for assembling us all here today. And as Christine was saying, these days, it seems that hardly a week goes by without a brutal lesson about the extraordinary force of nature. Whether it's firestorms in North America or typhoons in East Asia, to floods in Europe, droughts in Africa, or hurricanes in the Caribbean, we're constantly reminded the countless lives and decades of investments that can be lost by a single natural disaster. And many scientists warn that weather-related catastrophes are only becoming more frequent and more destructive. The people of the Caribbean hardly require such alerts. Several of your nations have suffered through tropical storms and floods that have wiped out the equivalent of your entire GDP. However, such recurrent events in which Caribbean countries remain among the world's most vulnerable nations to the effects of climate change. Their geography, as we all know, exposes them to many natural risks, and they share with their Latin American neighbors the same development challenges that therefore explain why so many of our countries still rely heavily on external aid to rebuild after disasters rather than investing in becoming more resilient. Now, part of the problem is a very human tendency to deal with what's urgent and postpone thinking about or making decisions or taking action on what might happen in the future. And in that sense, we simply need to get better at focusing on the long term, from how we use our natural capital to how we plan for urban growth and how we prepare for eventual catastrophes. But we also have to do things differently. Otherwise, we'll continue getting the same outcomes. Over the past few years, we've been trying new approaches with our partners in your region. The most recent example is the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator that we launched back in August. The accelerator is a coalition of dozens of governments, multilateral organizations, private sector and philanthropic partners who are committed to mobilizing climate-smart investments. Among other goals, we want to make 100% of the region's essential buildings and infrastructure systems capable of withstanding Category 5 hurricanes. The IDB will contribute to those collective efforts by boosting our own portfolio of climate-smart projects in the Caribbean by $1 billion over the next 5 years. And we equally want to step up our support for low-carbon energy and transportation projects, for energy efficiency, for water conservation programs, and more importantly, for coastal management and reef protection efforts. We also want to step up our efforts for developing innovative instruments to insure against catastrophic losses. And we want to expand the availability of contingent credit lines, such as the $450 million we recently committed to support the Bahamas, Jamaica, and Suriname, offering them quick access to resources to help them cushion the budgetary impact of large-scale disasters. But we also think that we need to reframe how we view the Caribbean. Instead of thinking of your nations as a collection of small islands and remote territories, perhaps we should start to think of you as a big ocean state with vast marine resources that are a vital component of our region's natural capital. In that spirit, we have developed the Sustainable Island Platform that can help foster economic growth and sustainable development, thereby improving on climate change adaptation and resilience in the Caribbean based on the concept of blue and circular economy. We know that the world's oceans generate over $3 trillion a year in economic benefits. Why should our seas, or your seas in this case, not become one of the principal engines of the Caribbean's economic growth? For example, through the platform, we hope to do things such as reforesting mangroves and regenerating coral reefs, as well as exploring opportunities to sustainably develop marine renewable energy and marine minerals, among other untapped resources. Complementing the Sustainable Island Platform, we have equally established a Natural Capital Lab, which has the mission of testing and scaling up new models of financing for projects related to natural capital. We hope to work with governments, with businesses, and with academia and nonprofit groups to help support researchers and entrepreneurs that are developing new technologies and processes that can help spur sustainable development. For example, we're looking into the idea of insuring coral reefs to pay for the restoration after natural disasters. The insurance premiums, as we spoke earlier, would be covered using taxes or user fees, while we would provide blended finance to bankroll the implementation of this model. In short, we want to move away from the short-term reaction-driven approach to dealing with disasters towards a forward-looking and long-term focused strategy that can help build resilience. And we want to spend less time, energy, and money worrying about the next hurricane season, and thereby invest more in the legacy that will leave our children and our grandchildren, as Kristalina reminded us. I know the prospect of a world threatened by climate change and the challenge of raising not billions but trillions of dollars to fend off that menace can be daunting. No single country and no single institution can face this on its own, but we can do it together, pooling our efforts, leveraging our resources, and putting our best ideas into action. That is our proposal, and I hope that you can all join us with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Moreno. It is our pleasure to have amidst us Minister Marie-Claire Bibeau from Canada. Ms. Bibeau is the Minister of International Development from Canada, and as the Managing Director noted earlier in her speech, Canada has been a champion for the region, and so it is a pleasure to welcome you to deliver your remarks.
Thank you. Presidents, Prime Ministers, colleague ministers, friends, Madame Christine Lagarde, Madame Kristalina Georgieva, Monsieur Luis Moreno, je vous remercie de m'avoir invité à me joindre à vous aujourd'hui. Caribbean heads of states and leaders of Caribbean institutions, it's a pleasure to be with you today and to see so many familiar faces. As you know, Canada has a special relationship with the people of the Caribbean region. It is based on our extensive people-to-people ties, our robust commercial relationship, our ongoing development cooperation, and our shared constituency at the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. In the wake of the 2017 hurricanes, Canada made a commitment to Caribbean nations. We recognize the unique vulnerabilities you face because of the effects of climate change. We committed to help you build resilience through the $100 million pledge we made at the UN CARICOM Pledging Conference last year. And we committed to listening to you and ensuring that your voice was heard on the world stage. In our G7 presidency year, Prime Minister Trudeau met with Caribbean heads of state on several occasions. Canada invited the outgoing and incoming CARICOM chairs, Prime Minister Holness of Jamaica and President Moïse of Haiti, to our G7 outreach session in Charlevoix. I also ensured that the interests of the Caribbean were raised at the G7 Development and Finance Ministers meeting that we hosted. My colleague, Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland, met with Caribbean foreign ministers at the UN General Assembly. And I have met with many of you and your foreign ministers at the COFCOR last May in Bahamas. Here is what we heard from you, our Caribbean friends. First, we heard your calls for greater joint efforts to build resilience and enhance mechanisms that make for effective disaster response, that helped guide our efforts in multilateral engagement. We took note of your concern about the unique vulnerabilities of Caribbean countries who are no longer eligible for ODA. At the OECD DAC, we were pleased to support an agreement for new rules that allow countries that have graduated to qualify for ODA eligibility if their incomes fall below a certain threshold because of a devastating hurricane, for example. Second, we heard that you have serious debt and public financial management issues to tackle. This is precisely why last week at the APEC summit, Prime Minister Trudeau announced $20 million in new funding to help strengthen public sector capacity in small island developing states, especially in public financial management and financial sector supervision, and in fostering inclusive growth. Third, we heard that Caribbean countries have difficulty accessing climate financing and that small Caribbean nations often do not have enough human resources to navigate the complex web of funding requirements. Today, I'm proud to announce that Canada will provide $15 million over 5 years to the UNDP's Engender project. The project will send technical experts to help Caribbean governments apply for the climate financing they so urgently need. The climate action plans implemented through this project will focus on sectors where women are the most affected. That is what we heard, how we responded, and how we plan to stay engaged. I would also like to say a few words about what we believe after having made extensive worldwide consultations and researches and analysis based on facts and evidence. Canada believes there can be no true resilience without gender equality and women empowerment. All of the assistance Canada provides must put women and girls at the center. That also means that we strive for gender-based budgeting. And our macroeconomic policies must respond to gender differences. We want to acknowledge women as agents of change, whether in politics, economics, and the role they play as leaders in their communities and households. Women must be included in decision-making processes. We also believe that small island states need special considerations when it comes to managing finances and debt, particularly after natural disaster. As Prime Minister Michel of Grenada remarked last year at the bank's annual meeting, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. That is why Canada has worked hard within our G7 presidency and in the Paris Club and other multilateral forums to advance resilient instruments for the Caribbean. As we will discuss this afternoon, these innovative financial instruments can provide automatic debt service relief in the aftermath of a natural disaster. This will allow small island states to focus on immediate humanitarian needs without also having to think about debt negotiations during a crisis. I would like to recognize Eastern Caribbean Central Bank Governor Timothy Antoine's leadership in advancing this important work. We also believe there can be no resilience without adequate insurance. That is why Canada's G7 summit announcements include $100 million to help expand climate risk insurance coverage in climate-vulnerable countries, including Caribbean and Pacific Island states. Our previous contribution to the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility successfully made it possible to provide $50 million in immediate payouts to hurricane-affected countries in 2017. Today, I'm proud to say that we have now allocated 70% of our $100 million pledge to the Caribbean. We have announced projects specific to countries such as Dominica, where we are helping to rebuild damaged school infrastructure and to pay the next 2 years of the country's Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility premium. We are also helping to set up Dominica's Climate Resilience Execution Agency. We have provided funds to help the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency strengthen the capacity of your emergency management agencies. In addition, we have announced a new $20 million Canada Caribbean Resilience Facility at the World Bank. This will provide expertise to help 9 Caribbean governments develop their disaster risk management policies and plans. It will also send rapid response teams to help Caribbean countries access emergency funding after a disaster. And finally, a word on oceans. Canada is proud to be a Commonwealth Blue Charter champion. At Charlevoix, the G7 leaders agreed to a blueprint for healthy oceans, seas, and resilient coastal communities, which promotes sustainable oceans and fisheries. As we speak, Canada is co-hosting the Sustainable Blue Economy Conference with Kenya. Canada knows that the sustainable use of marine resources is key to building resilience in small island states. The blue economy provides a model for economic diversification in the Caribbean. This is an area where the private sector has an important role in developing renewable energy, sustainable tourism and fishing, and building climate-resilient infrastructure. As governments, we need to create the enabling environment for them to succeed. I look forward to productive discussions today. What we have here is the opportunity to develop coherent responses to disaster and climate resilience in the Caribbean. Let's not miss this opportunity. Merci.